Welcome back to the Accessible Art History YouTube channel. For this week's video, I have another addition to my Differences series, and I'm going to be discussing the Northern and Italian Renaissances. Oftentimes in art history, the Italian Renaissance gets much of the attention. However, the Northern Renaissance is equally as fascinating. Both periods show the human desire to create and understand the world around them. One isn't better than the other. So to learn more, keep on watching. Before we get into the differences themselves, I think it's important to understand the historical backgrounds of each of these periods. Let's start with the Italian Renaissance. Dating from roughly the end of the 14th century through the end of the 16th, the word Renaissance comes from the Italian word rinascimento. It means a rebirth. This primarily refers to the rediscovery of Greek and Roman classical culture, a dramatic shift from the previous medieval period. The Italian Renaissance started in Florence. At the time, it was the third largest city in Western Europe. The economy of the city-state was prosperous due to trade, particularly of wool. This made it the perfect setting for a rebirth to occur. Besides a return to classical ideals, the Renaissance is also marked by advances in science and technology. Three of the biggest names of the period were Raphael, Michelangelo, and Leonardo da Vinci. Next up, we have the Northern Renaissance. As the name suggests, this rebirth took place across Western Europe in German, French, English, Low Countries, and Polish-controlled territories. Trade and commerce brought the ideas from the Italian peninsula, where they gave them a northern spin. It was more forgiving than tempera, which allowed artists more freedom to experiment with color and textures in their paintings. It's hard to pin down exact styles from this period because each culture added its own elements. The main themes include portraiture, scenes from everyday life, and religion. Some of the most famous names from this period include Hans Holbein, Albrecht Dürer, and Peter Bruegel the Elder. Alright, now that we've established some historical background, let's dive into the first major difference between these two styles. The difference has to do with the most common theme in art. During the Italian Renaissance, we see a focus on humanism and the classics. Humanism is a school of thought that emphasized the potential of humanity, individuality, and inquiry. It developed out of the rediscovery of classical philosophies that made their way to the Italian peninsula. One brilliant example of this is Raphael's School of Athens. Painted between 1509 and 11, it shows a gathering of the greatest thinkers in human history. The composition is balanced, making it a pleasing piece to the eye. It's a celebration of what humanity is and what it was capable of. However, in the North, there's more of an emphasis on religion. This is because the North was the center of the Protestant Reformation. By the time of the Renaissance, the population had grown tired of the continued corruption of the Catholic Church. Things were officially kicked off by Martin Luther in 1517 when he nailed his 95 Theses to the door of a church. And the landscape of the Western Church was forever changed by this. The goal was to get back to basics without the trappings and the, quote, man-made elements of the Church. An example of how this has permeated art is Noli Me Tangere by Hans Holbein. It was painted in 1526 and shows us the scene shortly after Christ was resurrected. He has appeared to Mary Magdalene, but cautions her against touching him. But unlike earlier works, Christ and Mary are barely marked as holy figures. Christ has a slight halo and Mary has her iconographic jar, but other than that, it's a simple scene that gets down to the roots of the story. Another difference between the Italian and Northern Renaissances is in medium. Of course, both styles utilize painting, but there are other ones. In Italy, sculpture became increasingly popular as archaeological digs occurred, especially in Rome. The rediscovery of the classical canon changed perspective of art and the human form. One excellent example of this is David by Michelangelo. Although it tells the story of the biblical king during his battle with Goliath, the statue is clearly classically inspired. From his contrapposto pose to the heroic nude style, and even to the marble medium, this statue could have been made in ancient Rome. The piece is quite beloved even from its unveiling. In fact, Giorgio Vasari, the father of art history, wrote, "When all was finished, it cannot be denied that this work has carried off of the palm from all other statues, modern or ancient, Greek or Latin. No other artwork is equal to it in any respect. With such just proportion, beauty, and excellence did Michelangelo finish it." In the North, printmaking became a popular medium. With the advent of the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg in 1453, prints were easily accessible forms of art. Engravings and woodcuts could be easily distributed across territories. This also helped fuel the Reformation as texts, such as the vernacular Bible, could be printed and read by the laypeople for the first time. I love this connection because it shows how art permeates everything. One of the masters of print work was Albrecht Dürer. This work is one of his most famous, The Knight, Death, and the Devil. It was created in 1513 and has a deep moral and spiritual meaning. The good and just knight must face many hardships on his journey through life. These kinds of messages were popular as prints because it helped to reinforce religious and artistic ideals to the general population. The final difference of this video is about the common subjects shown in works. Again, there is some overlap, but we see the differences more often than not. In the Italian Renaissance, the noble class were typically the only class that could afford to have their likenesses painted. It was used as a status symbol because only the wealthy could afford it. For example, Leonardo da Vinci painted this portrait of Ginevra de' Benci around 1475. It shows a beautiful young woman making eye contact with the viewer. It's highly realistic, especially compared to portraiture from the medieval period. And cheeky as ever, Leonardo included a pun on her name. Behind her is a juniper bush, which in Italian is Ginevra. However, in the Northern Renaissance, we see more of an emphasis on depictions of peasant life. These weren't necessarily commissioned portraits, but instead precursors to later genre paintings. It was all about showing the pleasures of a simple life, but also a way to incorporate moral lessons. One example of this is The Peasant Wedding by Peter Bruegel the Elder. It was painted in 1567 and shows exactly what the title would suggest. It's a jolly, chaotic scene that celebrates one of the greatest elements of life, love. However, there's also a moral element. If you look closely, it's almost impossible to distinguish who the groom is. The bride is clearly marked under the green canopy, but she's alone. This could be a nod to the Flemish proverb, "It is a poor man who is not able to be at his own wedding." Although these Renaissances were separated by many, many miles, both the Italian and Northern Renaissances are remarkable parts of art history. They show us a new way of thinking about what art could be and how humans understand the world around them. These periods also highlight the desires that we have to create beauty as a form of expression.